Hi, everybody. This is Allison from Alley Cat Creations. How are you? Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you have yet to do so. And if you get anything from my work, I connected on an epiphany, a mind explosion. Sorry, a new author to read, a new book to read, a new author to explore. Please consider supporting my channel. All the links are at the bottom of the description. Another way you could support this channel, I have a channel membership. It's only at 3D right now, but the more members I get, the bigger the access and perks and fun stuff that will come as this channel grows. So if you would like to be a part of that, uh, members only oracle reads, paint and sips, hanging out in the studio with me, all kinds of fun stuff. Cheap membership. Think about it. Another way you can help me, holidays are incoming quite quickly. I make very unique. This is floral skulls, pyramids. I have healing. This is a medium. It's quite heavy. A lot of stones there. I make skulls. I have organite features in them. I make signage. Large gem. This is pyrite. Pyramids. Once again, large gem pyramids. Hearts. This is thick. This is not, I could hurt somebody very badly with this. I have some signage that is almost done and ready to show, hopefully by the weekend. I paint, spray paint, add some florals and some signage, and then I put epoxy over it so it doesn't get ruined. All that fun stuff. So go check my website at alleycatcreations211.com. I'm also in the middle of doing a commissioned drawing and making gingerbread crayons. I do a lot of different things. But this is all to help me keep afloat as I am continuously losing weight and don't know what I'm going to do with my bills. It's fun times. My full-time job doesn't pay my bills. Let's just put it that way. And things are getting a little crazy. So if you can help me in any way, that'd be a blessing. And if not, just like, share, and subscribe. That helps me. This one shall be very, 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 very extremely interesting. Paper 82, The Evolution of Marriage. Marriage, mating, grows out of bisexuality. Marriage is man's recreational adjustment to such bisexuality, while the family life is the sum total resulting from all such evolutionary and adaptive adjustments. Marriage is enduring. It is not inherent in biologic evolution, but is the basis of all social evolution and therefore certain of continued existence in some form. Marriage has given mankind the home, and the home is the crowning glory of the whole long and arduous evolutionary struggle. While religious, social, and educational institutions are all essential to the survival of cultural civilization, the family is the master civilizer. A child learns most of the essentials of life from his family and the neighbors. The humans of olden times did not possess a very rich social civilization. but such as they had there faithfully and effectively passed on to the next generation. And you should recognize that most of these civilizations of the past continue to evolve with a bare minimum of other institutional influences because the home was effectively functioning. Today, the human race possesses a rich social and cultural heritage, and it should be wisely and effectively passed on to succeeding generations. The family as an educational institution must be maintained. The mating instinct. Notwithstanding the personality gulf between men and women, the sex urge is sufficient to ensure their coming together for the reproduction of the species. This instinct operated effectively long before humans experienced much of what was later called love, devotion, and marital loyalty. Mating is an innate propensity, and marriage is an evolutionary social repercussion. Sex, interest, and desire were not dominating passions in primitive peoples. They simply took them for granted. The entire reproductive experience was free from imaginative embellishment. The all-absorbing sex passion of the more highly civilized peoples is chiefly due to the race mixtures, especially where the evolutionary nature has been simulated by the associated imagination and beauty appreciation of the Nodites and the Adamites. But the Andite inheritance was absorbed by the evolutionary races in such limited amounts as to fail to provide sufficient self-control. For the animal passions thus quickened and aroused by the endowment of keener sex consciousness and stronger mating urges of the evolutionary races, the red man had the highest sex code. The regulation of sex in relation to marriage indicates 1. The relative progress of civilization. Civilization has increasingly demanded that sex be grafted in useful channels and in accordance with the mores. The amount of Andite stock in any people, among such groups, sex has become excessive about the highest and the lowest in both the physical and the emotional natures. The Sangic races had normal animal passion, but they displayed little imagination or appreciation of the beauty and physical attractiveness of the opposite sex. What is called sex appeal is virtually absent even in present-day primitive races. These unmixed peoples have a definite mating instinct, but insufficient sex attraction to create serious problems requiring social control. The mating instinct is one of the dominant physical driving forces of human beings. It is the one emotion which, in the guise of individual gratification, effectively tricks selfish men into putting race welfare and perpetuation high above individual ease and personal freedom from responsibility. As the institution marriage, from its early beginnings down to modern times, pictures the social evolution of the biologic propensity for self-perpetuation. The perpetuation of the evolving human species is made certain by the presence of the racial mating impulse, an urge which is loosely called sex attraction. This great biologic urge becomes the impulse hub for all sorts of associated instincts, emotions, and usages, physical, intellectual, moral, and social. With the savage, the food supply was the impelling motivation, but when civilization ensures plentiful food, the sex urge may sometimes become a dominant impulse and therefore ever stands in the need of social regulation. In animals, instinctive curiosity checks the mating propensity, but since man is so largely a self-controlled being, sex desire is not altogether periodic. Therefore, does it become necessary for society to improve self-control upon the individual? No human emotion or impulse, when unbridled and overindulged, can produce so much harm and sorrow as this powerful sex urge. Intelligent submission of this impulse to the regulations of society is a supreme test of the actuality of any civilization. self-control, more and more self-control, is the ever-increasing demand of advancing mankind. Secrecy, insincerity, and hypocrisy may obscure sex problems, but they do not provide solutions, nor do they advance ethics. The restrictive taboos. The story of the evolution of marriage is simply the history of sex control through the pressure of social, religious, and civil restrictions. Nature hardly recognizes individuals. It takes no cognizance of so-called morals. It is only and exclusively interested in the reproduction of the species. Nature compelling instincts on reproduction, but indifferently leaves the consequential problems to be solved by society, thus creating an ever-present and major problem for evolutionary mankind. This social conflict consists in the unending war between basic instincts and evolving ethics. Among the early races, there was little or no regulation of the relations of sexes. Because of this, sex license, no prostitution existed. Today, the Pygmies and other backward groups have no marriage institution. A study of these peoples reveals the simple mating customs followed by primitive races. But all ancient people should always be studied and judged in the light of the moral standards of the Moors of their own times. Free love, however, has never been in good standing above the scale of rank savagery. The moment societal groups began to form, marriage codes and marital restrictions began to develop. Mating has thus progressed through a multitude of transitions from a state of almost complete sex license to the 20th century standards of relativity, complete sex restriction. In the earliest stages of tribal development, the mores and restrictive taboos were very crude, but they did keep the sexes apart. This favored quiet, order, and industry, and the long evolution of marriage and the home had begun. The sex customs of dress, adornment, and religious practices had their origin in these early taboos, which defined the range of sex liberties and thus eventually created concepts of vice, crime, and sin. But it was long the practice to suspend all sex regulations on high festival days, especially May Day. Women have always been subject to more restrictive taboos than men. The early Moors granted the same degree of sex liberty to unmarried women as to men, but it has always been required of wives that they be faithful to their husbands. Primitive marriage did not much curtail men's sex liberties, but it did render further sex license taboo to the wife. Married women had always borne some mark which set them apart as a class by themselves, such as a hairdress, clothing, veil, seclusion, ornamentation, and rings. Interesting. Early marriage mores. Marriage is the institutional response of the social organism to the ever-present biologic tension of man's unremitting urge to reproduction, self-propagation. Mating is universally natural. As a society evolved from the simple to the complex, there was a corresponding evolution of the mating mores, the genesis of the marital institution. Wherever social evolution has progressed to the stage at which mores are generated, marriage will be found as an evolving institution. There always have been and always will be two distinct realms of marriage. The mores, the laws regulating the external aspects of mating, and the otherwise secret and personal relations of men and women. Always has the individual been rebellious against the sex regulations imposed by society, and thus is the reason for the age-long sex problem. Self-maintenance is individual, but is carried on by the group. Self-perpetuation is social, but is secured by individual impulse. I'm going to put a pause here. I'm going to put a note. Although this book was 1955. Sorry, I need glasses. Um, so mind you, this was 1955. Um, in today's standards, things have changed rapidly, and kudos to that change. I'm not for or against anybody of the same sex marriage. I have plenty of friends on that end that are happily married and that are lesbian or gay. And I'm fine with that. They live happy, beautiful lives, and love is love. And love is the song of the universe. So I let it fly and freely flow for wherever it goes. We have to stop judging those notions. Um, People like myself, I have yet to have children and probably won't, but I might adopt or be a stepmom one day, or just be a good role model to somebody. I don't need to be an actual physical mother to be of mother essence. And the same with those people. Not everybody that's in a man and woman relationship can have children. I'm adopted. I'm in one of those other ones that we can put down there. I'm adopted. So let's just keep in mind that the time that this book was written in and channeled through, we can upgrade a lot of this. Please don't get offended. Once again, this is just perception of a race of otherworldly beings. And they're talking about the history. So just be mindful. I just want everybody who is of difference, and not that it's a bad difference, but out of the social mechanized norms that have been programmed into us. If you find offense, please don't. It's just backstory. Like I said, love is love. You don't have to agree with that love, but it's here. It's not going nowhere. And we have to respect it. I do. Just putting that out there. The Moors, when respected, oh, there's that word, have ample power to restrain and control the sex urge, as has been shown among all races. Marriage standards have always been a true indicator of the current power of the Moors and the functional integrity of the civil government. But the early sex and mating Moors were a mass of inconsistent and crude regulations. Parents, children, relatives, and society all had conflicting interests in the marriage regulations. But in spite of all this, those races who exalted and practiced marriage naturally evolved to higher levels and survived in increased numbers. In primitive times, marriage was the price of social standing. The possession of a wife was a badge of distinction. The savage looked upon his wedding day as marking his entrance upon responsibility and manhood. In one age, marriage had been looked upon as a social duty, in another as a religious obligation, and in still another as a political requirement to provide citizens for the state. Another pause. We see this today, and all of those categories still exist. Whether it be family dynamics and social dynamics, and depending on the groups that you belong to, the religious groups, that really hasn't changed. There's still people that are handed over in marriage blindly. And I actually met people that have been here, you're marrying my son, and you have no say. It exists. Many early tribes required feats of stealing as qualification for marriage. Later, people substituted for such raiding, forays, athletic contests, and competitive games. The winners in those contests were awarded the first prize choice of the season's brides. Among the headhunters, a youth might not marry until he possessed at least one head, although each skulls were sometimes purchasable. As buying of wives declined, they were won by riddle contests, a practice that still survives among many groups of the black men. With advancing civilization, certain tribes put the severe marriage tests of male endurances in the hands of the women. They thus were able to favor the men of their choice. These marriage tests embraced skill in hunting, fighting, and ability to provide for a family. The groom was long required to enter the bride's family for at least 1 year, there to live in labor and prove that he was worthy of the wife he sought. The qualifications of a wife were the ability to perform hard work and to bear children. She was required to execute a certain piece of agricultural work within a given time. And if she had borne a child before marriage, she was all the more valuable. Her fertility was thus assured. The fact that ancient peoples regarded it as a disgrace or even a sin not to be married explains the origin of child marriages. Since one must be married, the earlier the better. It was also a general belief that unmarried persons could not enter spirit land, and thus was a further incentive to child marriages, even at birth and sometimes before birth, contingent upon sex. The ancients believed that even the dead must be married. The original matchmakers were employed to negotiate marriages for deceased individuals. One parent would arrange for these intermediaries to effect the marriage of a dead son with a dead daughter of another family. Among later peoples, puberty was the common age of marriage, but this has advanced in direct proportion to the progress of civilization. Early in social evolution, particular and celibate orders of both men and women arose. They were started and maintained by individuals more or less lacking normal sex urge. Many tribes allowed members of the ruling group to have sex relations with the bride just before she was to be given to her husband. Each of these men would give the girls a present, and this was the origin of the custom of giving wedding presents. Among some groups, it was expected that a young woman would earn her dowry, which consisted of the presents received in the reward for her sex service in the bride's exhibition hall. Some tribes married the young men to the widows and older women, and then, when they were subsequently left widowers, would allow them to marry the young girls, thus ensuring, as they expressed it, that both parents would not be fools, as they conceived would be the case of two youths who were allowed to mate. Other tribes limited mating to similar age groups. It was the limitation of marriage to certain age groups that first gave origin to the ideas of incest. In India, there are even now no age restrictions on marriage. I don't know if that's changed. Under certain Moors, widowhood was greatly to be feared, widows being either killed or allowed to commit suicide on their husbands' graves, for they were supposed to go over into spirit land with their spouses. The surviving widow was almost invariably blamed for her husband's death. Some tribes burned them alive. If a widow continued to live, her life was one of continuous mourning and unbearable social restriction, since remarriage was generally disapproved. In the olden days, many practices now regarded as immoral were encouraged. Primitive wives not infrequently took great pride in their husbands' affairs with other women. Chastity in girls was a great hindrance to marriage. The bearing a child before marriage greatly increased a girl's desirability as a wife, since the man was sure of having a fertile companion. Many primitive tribes sanctioned trial marriage until the woman became pregnant. When the regular marriage ceremony would be performed among other groups, the wedding was not celebrated until the first child was born. If a wife was barren, she had to be redeemed by her parents and the marriage was annulled. The Moors demanded that every pair have children. These primitive trial marriages were entirely free from all semblance of license. They were simply sincere tests of fecundity. The contracting individuals married permanently just as soon as fertility was established. When modern couples marry with the thought of convenient divorce in the background of their minds, if they are not wholly pleased with their married life, they are in reality entering upon a form of trial marriage, and one that is far beneath the status of the honest adventures of their less civilized ancestors. Marriage under the property mores. Marriage has always been closely linked with both property and religion. Property has been the stabilizer of marriage, religion, and moralizer. Primitive marriage was an investment in economic speculation. It was more a matter of business than an affair of flirtation. The ancients married for the advantage and welfare of the group, wherefore their marriages were planned and arranged by the group, their parents and elders, and that the property mores were effective in stabilizing the marriage institution is born out of the fact that the marriage was more permanent among the early tribes than it is among modern people. As civilization advanced and private property gained further recognition in the Moors, stealing became the great crime. Adultery was recognized as a form of stealing, an infringement of the husband's property rights. It is not therefore especially mentioned in the earlier codes in Moors. Women started out as the property of her father, who transferred his title to her husband, and all legalized sex relations grew out of these pre-existent property rights. The Old Testament deals with women as a form of property. The Quran teaches their inferiority. Man had the right to lend his wife to a friend or guest, and this custom still obtains among certain peoples. Modern sex jealousy is not innate. It is a product of the evolving Moors. Primitive man was not jealous of his wife. He was just guarding his property. The reason for holding the wife to stricter sex account than the husband was because her marital infidelity involved descent and inheritance. Very early in the march of civilization, the illegitimate child fell into disrepute. At first, only the woman was punished for adultery. Later on, the Moors also decreed the chastisement of her partner, and for long ages, the offended husband or the protector father had the full right to kill the male trespasser. Modern peoples retain these mores, which allow so-called crimes of honor under the unwritten law. Since the chastity taboo had its origin as a phase of the property mores, it applied at first to married women, but not to unmarried girls. In later years, chastity was more demanded by the father than by the suitor. A virgin was a commercial asset to the father. She brought a higher price. As chastity came more into demand, it was the practice to pay the father a bride fee in recognition of the service of properly rearing a chaste bride for the husband-to-be. When one started, this idea of female chastity took such hold on the races that it became the practice literally to cage up girls, actually to imprison them for years in order to assure their virginity. And so the more recent standards and virginity tests automatically gave origin to the professional prostitute classes. They were the rejected brides, those women who were found by the groom's mothers not to be virgins. That's not fun. I'm sure to pronounce these next two very wrong, but let's take a shot. Endogamy and exogamy. Very early, the savage observed that race mixture improved the quality of the offspring. It was not that inbreeding was always bad, but the outbreeding was always comparatively better. Therefore, the Moors tended to crystallize in a restriction of sex relations among near relatives. It was recognized that outbreeding greatly increased the selective opportunity for evolutionary variation and advancement. The outbred individuals were more versatile and had greater ability to survive in a hostile world. The inbreeders, together with their Moors, gradually disappeared. This was a slow development. The savage did not consciously reason about such problems. but the latter and advancing peoples did. And they also made the observation that general weakness sometimes resulted from excessive inbreeding. While the inbreeding of good stock sometimes resulted in the upbuilding of strong tribes, the specular case of the bad results of the inbreeding of heredity defects more forcibly impressed the mind of men, with the result that the advancing Moors increasingly formulated taboos against all marriages among near relatives. Religion has long been an effective barrier against outmarriage. Many religious teachings have prescribed marriage outside the faith. Women have usually favored the practice of in-marriage, men outmarriage. Property has always influenced marriage, and sometimes in an effort to conserve property within a clan, Moors have arisen compelling women to choose husbands within their fathers' tribes. Rulings of this sort led to great multiplication of cousin marriages. Inmating was also practiced in an effort to preserve craft secrets. Skilled workmen sought to keep the knowledge of their craft within the family. Superior groups, when isolated, always reverted to consanguineous mating. The Nordites, for over 150,000 years, were one of the great in-marriage groups. The later day in-marriage Moors were tremendously influenced by the traditions of the violet race, in which at first matings were perforce between brother and sister marriages were common in early Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, and throughout the lands once occupied by the Andites. The Egyptians long practiced brother and sister marriages in an effort to keep the royal blood pure, a custom which persisted even longer in Persia. Among the Mesopotamians before the days of Abraham, cousin marriages were obligatory. Cousins had prior marriage rights to cousins. Abraham himself has married his half-sister, but such unions were not allowed under the latter Moors of the Jews. The first move away from brother and sister marriages came about under the plural wife Moors, because the sister wife would arrogantly dominate the other wife or wives. Some tribal Moors forbade marriage to a dead brother's widow, but required the living brother to beget children for his departed brother. There is no biologic instinct against any degree of in-marriage, which restrictions are wholly matter of taboo. Outmarriage finally dominated because it was favored by the man. To get a wife from the outside ensured great freedom from in-laws. Familiarity breeds contempt, so as the element of individual choice began to dominate mating, it became the custom to choose partners from the outside tribe. Many tribes finally forbade marriages within the clan, others limited mating to certain castes. The taboo against marriage was a woman of one's own totem, gave impetus to the custom of stealing women from neighbors' tribes. Later on, marriages were regulated more in accordance with the territorial residence than with kinship. There were many steps in the evolution of in-marriage into the modern practice of outmarriage. Even after the taboo rested upon in-marriages, for the common people, chiefs and kings were permitted to marry those of close kin in order to keep the royal blood consecrated and pure. The Moors have usually permitted sovereign rulers certain licenses in sex matters. The present day of the later Andite people had much to do with the increasing desire of the Sangic races to mate outside of their own tribes, but it was not possible for outmating to become prevalent until neighboring groups had learned to live together in relative peace. Outmarriage itself was a peace promoter. Marriages between the tribes lessened hostilities. Outmarriage led to tribal coordination. Sorry, guys, to military alliances. It became dominant because it provided increased strength. It was a nation builder. Outmarriage was also greatly favored in increasing trade contacts, eventually facilitating the cross-fertilization of race cultures. The otherwise inexplicable inconsistencies of racial marriage Moors are largely due to the outmarriage custom with its accompanying wife stealing and buying from foreign tribes, all of which resulted in a compounding of the separate tribal mores. That these taboos respecting in-marriage were sociologic, not biologic, is well illustrated by the taboos on kinship marriages, which embrace many degrees of in-law relationships, cases representing no blood relation whatsoever. Racial mixtures. There are no pure races in the world today. The early and original evolutionary peoples of color have only two representative races persisting in the world, the yellow man and the black man, and even these two races are much mixed with the extant colored peoples. While the so-called white race is predominantly descended from the ancient blue man, it is a mix more or less with all other races, much as is the red man of the Americas. Of the six colored Sangic races, three were primary and three were secondary. Though the primary races, blue, red, and yellow, were in many respects superior to the three secondary peoples, it should be remembered that these secondary races had many desirable traits which would have been considerably enhanced the primary peoples if the better strains would have been absorbed. Present-day prejudice against half-caste hybrids and mongrels arises because modern racial crossbreeding is for the greater part between the grossly inferior strains of the races concerned. You also get unsatisfactory offspring when the degenerate strands of same race intermarry. If the present-day races of Urantia could be freed from the curse of their lowest strata of deterioration, antisocial, feeble-minded, and outcast specimens, there would be little objection to a limited race amalgamation. And if such racial mixtures could take place between the highest types of the several races, still less objection could be offered. Hybridization of superior and dissimilar stocks is the secret of the creation of new and more vigorous strains. And this is true of plants, animals, and the human species. Hybridization augments vigor and increases fertility. Race mixtures of the average or superior strata of various peoples greatly increase creative potential, as is shown in the present population of the United States of America. When such matings take place between the lower or inferior strata, creativity is diminished, as is shown by the present-day peoples of southern India. Race blending greatly contributes to the sudden appearance of new characteristics, and if such hybridization is the union of superior strands, then these new characteristics will also be superior traits. Let's hope that works. As long as present-day races are so overlooked with inferior and degenerate strains, race intermingling on a large scale would be most detrimental, but most of the objections to such experiments rest on social and cultural prejudices rather than on biological considerations. Even among inferior stocks, hybrids often are an improvement on their ancestors. Hybridization makes for species improvement because of the role of the dominant genes. Racial intermixed increases the likelihood of a larger number of the desirable dominants between present in the hybrid. For the past 100 years, more racial hybridization has been taking place on Urantia than has occurred in thousands of years. The danger of gross disharmonies as a result of crossbreeding of human stocks has been greatly exaggerated. The chief troubles of half-breeds are due to social prejudices. The Pitcairn experiment of blending the white and the Polynesian races turned out fairly well because the white man and the Polynesian women were of fairly good racial strains. Interbreeding between the highest types of the white, red, and yellow races would immediately bring into existence new and biologically effective characteristics. These three peoples belong to the primary Sangic races. Mixtures of the white and black races are not so desirable as their immediate results. Neither are such mulatto offspring too objectionable as social and racial prejudice would seek to make them appear. Physically, such white-black hybrids are excellent specimen of humanity, notwithstanding their slight inferiority in some other respects. I disagree with that. And again, I know a lot of people, including my own family, that's mixed. We're human. Is it talking about hybrids and aliens? My hat's off to them but they're not talking about other extraterrestrials. So I don't quite, I don't mesh with that. When a primary Sangic race amalgamates with a secondary Sangic race, the latter is considerable improved at the expense of the former and on a small scale, extending over large periods of time. There can be little serious objection to such a sacrificial contribution by their primary races to the betterment of the secondary groups. Biologically considered, the secondary Sangics were in some respects superior to the primary races. After all, the real jeopardy of the human species is to be found in the unstrained multiplication of the inferior and degenerate strains of the various civilized peoples rather than in any supposed danger of their racial interbreeding. Presented by the Chief of Seraphim, stationed on Urantia. And thus ends paper 82. Next time, the marriage institution. Bum, bum, bum. Just want to take a little end note here in perception. I don't do this ordinarily, but because of perception here, I don't agree with some of the stuff that's there. Obviously, we in the world at large has been interbreeding with every race, culture, creed, except for tribes in the Amazon and unobtainable peoples in certain stretches of very closed off areas where these people don't want anything to do with outside the world. They want to live in their tribalism and do them, and that's great. That's the experience they signed up for under God's world. But at large, looking at general society, love doesn't have any bounds or forms. Love takes all shapes, and we have to stop judging what other people do in their closed doors. For the same as racial, what they were saying, people are born in all different capacities, for that's God's will. There are going to be people that are born with degenerative diseases and other issues per se. I know a bunch of people that were born without limbs that have deformities. They chose those deformities before they came in. Are you going to hold them to any less extent as a human being? I would stop to say you're not really that nice of a person if you do. Now more and more jobs, corporations are now accepting people that have autism and all types of different hindrances that we claim that are hindrances. For them, it's not. It's just their everyday world. We got to stop with the judging. Everybody's capable of doing something, if not at least put a smile on your face. It's an old way of thinking, and this is just a perception from a book. So please take that with a grain of salt, because I know there are people on either end that love this book and will go and follow it to the T. And then there's some people that question what is written. I just keep an open mind and expansiveness that there is some truth to a lot of what's being said, yet at the same time should not be taken word for word as is. Unless you remember your past lives, past carnations, or concurrent carnations in those other paradigms. The world is a unique and beautiful place. Let's keep it that way. Sending each and every one of you love, light, compassion, grace, shielding, and protective energy. Please go within, be the shoulder, be the lighthouse, seed your truths. Make sure to hit that like. Nobody likes my stuff. I don't know why. It's free energy. If you're so able to help contribute to my channel, you can get a membership or you can help me. All the links are down below. I don't judge. $1 is better than nothing. But I love you guys nonetheless. And thank you so much for your support and my gratitude to everybody who does help me out. If it wasn't for a lot of people, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be fed. Odin and Freya would be jumping off the walls right now. But thank you all for your support. So much gratitude to everybody. And I hope to see you on the next one. Bye for now.